it's engaging with these stories. And if you live in the countryside, you want to be eating the landscape around you. If you live in the city, it's great to see what's coming in from around the city and to have that connection with the food that hasn't come too far. That's why farmers markets are such a great thing, and provide us with some nice stories about the food we're taking home.
English writer, broadcaster and food activist Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall has been in the public eye for about 25 years. He came to prominence as the founding host of River Cottage, and he's gone on to write, I think, 15 books on food. In recent years, he's campaigned on numerous food systems issues, including ethical meat and fishing. He's coming to Australia as part of the VIVA Health and Wellness Festival, and because he has a new book to chat about, how to eat 30 plants a week. I am really thrilled to have Hugh on Dirty Linen today. Welcome, Hugh.
Thanks, Dani. It's a pleasure to be with you.
It's really good to have you on the show. So, health and wellness, a health and wellness festival. What does health and wellness mean to you?
Well, I think it means different things to different people, but I guess one of the things it means to me is I'm getting a little older, and I want to feel okay as I enter the what should we say, final third. I'm one of those people who didn't think massively about my health when I was younger, particularly in relation to food. It was food has been a great adventure for me for my whole life, and it still is. That's not to say I ate a lot of unhealthy food, because I was always interested in where food came from. And as soon as you take that interest, you want to know who grew it, what the story is. If it's a piece of meat, what animal did it, what breed did it come from? What's that animal eaten? How could that affect the flavor? And if you have that intrinsic interest in the quality of foods, I think that serves you on the whole reasonably well for your health. But in the last decade or so, I've become, I suppose, more intensely interested in how we can actually steer our diets towards keeping us well. And it's, if we're coming from a standpoint of reasonably good health, it's largely about staying well. But if we have, for whatever reason, allowed our diets to get the better of us, shall we say, then changing the way we eat can really be quite transformative. So it depends where you are, and it depends where you want to be. But there are some things that I think we can all sign up to for our well-being, and one of them, increasing consensus among scientists and nutritionists everywhere, is to eat a lot more plants.
I mean, it's such an interesting... It's an interesting journey to try to bring people on, isn't it? Because as you say, people start in such different places. And I feel like in the time that you've been talking about it, the conversation has shifted a bit from, putting personal responsibility at the forefront, eat an apple a day, keep the doctor away, it's all on you kind of thing, to a sort of dawning realization that the food systems that we are all implicated in make it easier or harder at times for us to, I guess, put health at the forefront of the way we eat. I mean, how do you reconcile that as you campaign on these things?
Well, you're absolutely right. We are in the Western world and globally, because the food system, the industrial food system, is in itself voracious, and it likes to gobble up cultures and try and bring everything in line, so that we there's a tendency for us all to end up eating a lot of the same foods, many of which aren't good for us. So we do need systems change, but until the systems change, individual resilience is definitely a tool that we can all deploy. So I campaign on the political front. For example, here in the UK, we still have kids being bombarded with advertising for unhealthy foods during their favorite TV shows and online which is increasingly a problem on the various platforms that kids enjoy. They find themselves again targeted for advertising of foods that will, if they if they get into them, when they're young, they're not going to be well as they grow older. So that's a real problem, and that needs political solutions, and it needs big business to acknowledge some of the problems that they've created and to address them. That's a slow moving beast, and we don't necessarily all want to wait around for the food culture around us to change for the better, or you could say we can't really necessarily afford to wait around. In which case, we're going to have to take some steps, not necessarily on our own, because there's help out there, and I hope that one of the things I can do is actually help to enthuse people about making changes in the way they eat, so that it doesn't necessarily feel like a massive chore or an obligation or something you do out of a sense of virtue or asceticism, but you do it because it's going to be fun and still delicious, and it's going to make you feel good. So trying to find, help people find positive motivation around eating food. And that's coming back to the idea of eating more plants. That should be a relatively easy win, because I mean, I'm still an omnivore, by the way. I'm not coming. I mean, I've got a lot of time for vegans and I've got time for anyone who's got principles and ideas that inform the way they eat, rather than just not really thinking about what you eat. So I've got a lot of time for vegans and anyone who's thinking about the way they eat. But I'm still an omnivore. River Cottage, our cookery school, is still omnivorous. We enjoy our meat and fish, but more and more we put plants at the center of our cooking. And even if you're eating a lovely piece of meat, you're going to find a lot of plants on your plate as well, or before or after, etc., etc. So that's kind of where I'm coming from at the moment, and I think it's a good direction of travel.
Yeah, love it. So, I mean, if someone is to try to eat 30 plants a week, well, actually, first of all, what does that mean? Does that mean eating 30 different plants, fruits and vegetables? Does it mean, tell me what it means?
Absolutely, absolutely. It does mean eating 30 different plants, but it doesn't mean plants in the in the narrow sense of fruit and veggies, because obviously there's a wide range of plants that we have in our diets, not just what we think of as fresh fruit and veg. There's pulses and nuts and seeds. There's the dry store of excellent plant-based ingredients, and of course there's the whole world of herbs and spices as well. And all of these foods count. So we're not sort of asking people to leap from the sort of. I mean, here in the UK for a long time, the government has been encouraging us to eat 5 fresh fruit and veg a day. That's not a bad target if you can pull it off. But once you start including and recognizing that diversity is the key. So not just the same 5 fruit and veg, an apple, a carrot, a bit of lettuce, etc. every day, but really embracing the diversity of what's out there. I mean, there are 2 underlying principles here. Eating a lot of whole foods that haven't been refined, and indeed a lot. So go whole and go varied are my 2 mantras. That was, in fact, the kind of lead idea of one of my previous books, Eat Better Forever. And now we got 30 plants in our site because it's turned out to be just. I mean, obviously, it doesn't have to be exactly 30, but 30's turned out to be a kind of quite an optimal number from a number of studies and indeed meta studies that looked at lots and lots of different diets and the health outcomes of those diets. So people who are maybe doing paleo or on a vegan diet or trying all sorts of diets, it turns out that the best health outcomes weren't necessarily associated with a particular diet, but within that diet, how many different plants a week you were eating. So going back to the 30, that turned out to be pretty much optimal. More than 30 is great, but the benefits climb very steeply in terms of heart health and gut health and a diverse microbiome and all those things that we know are important. The benefits rose pretty steeply till you get to 30, and then they continue to rise a little bit, but they plateau. So 30 is a really good target number. And once you realize that actually includes seeds and spices and herbs, it doesn't feel like quite such a stretch. And if you're someone who enjoys, you know, when you head for the shops, seeing what's seasonal and fresh and what's new in that week, you can rack up your 30 plants pretty quickly. And if you're someone who enjoys cooking with spices, then that's a great help as well. I cook more and more with whole seed spices, so I'll get a teaspoon of cumin seeds and bash them up and throw them into the tray of roasting veg or whatever I'm got on the go, and I know I'm getting the benefit of breaking open that whole seed and releasing not just its aromatics but its micronutrients. And this is key to the idea of eating a lot of different plants. Every plant has different things to offer. There's some overlaps, obviously, and frankly, that's one of the reasons they taste different too. Is because they've got different things in them. The aromatics are closely related to the micronutrients. So if we're experiencing a lot of different flavors, we're also experiencing a lot of different benefits from plants. So the whole thing goes hand in hand with eating adventurous flavors as well as a wide range of different plants.
Well, I reckon anyone reading that title and engaging with it would just, the next thing you do is tally up how many plants you'd eaten recently. And I don't want to be smug, but just before we got on this call, and I've just realized now I just ate 6 plants because I made the simplest pasta, and it's really just a using up what's around pasta. But with it, I had just like a punnet of cherry tomatoes, and then I grabbed out of the garden some basil and parsley, and my garden's just like out of control. But what I could find in it was some warrigal greens, which is an Australian native plant, which you'll have to try if you haven't already, plus a bit of spinach, plus a bit of silver beet. Yeah, so spinach, silver beet, warrigal greens, parsley, basil, tomato with pasta. I'm actually flying. I can just ease off later in the week.
You're well on the way, Dani. But can I ask you, did you put a twist of black pepper on that?
Yes, I did. Does that count too?
So, of course it does. Yeah, absolutely it does. It's a plant-based ingredient, and it's a whole ingredient. When you've got those whole seeds in your pepper grinder and you grind them and you release the aromatics and you sprinkle another tiny little portion of nutrients on your plate as well. These things are all significant. Now, obviously, the idea is not to just eat a load of really bland foods and throw a bunch of spice on it. Those whole veggies and whole fruits are important too. But everything counts. That's the point. You're allowed to feel good about all the diversity in your diet, not just the fresh fruit and veg, all that plant diversity. So it doesn't have to be fresh, but it does want to be whole, so unprocessed, unrefined, with all its goodness still intact. And the seeds, the spice seeds in your cupboard, they can sit there for 2 or 3 years. They can actually go well past their use-by date. But if they're whole seeds, those nutrients are still packed in there. And they fade very, very slowly. And when you crack those seeds open, you release those nutrients as well as releasing those lovely aromatic flavors. And you do yourself a power of good as well as making your food taste better.
Yeah, love that. And I think you've answered my next question, which is I couldn't pour a glass of wine and call it 7, could I? Because the grapes have been processed.
Well, it doesn't really tally to class a glass of wine as a plant. But depending on the degree of processing, if it hasn't got a lot of additives, if maybe it's a natural wine or an organic wine, we know there are benefits associated, particularly with an occasional glass of red wine. And coffee does count. It's because it isn't highly processed. It's roasted and it's ground. And a decent cup of freshly made coffee has got all sorts of things in it. That's why half the world drinks a couple of cups of it every morning, because it has got, it's obviously got caffeine that gives us that lift, but it's got all sorts of other things in it as well. And Professor Tim Spector, who's written the introduction to my book, is a good friend of mine and a great kind of evangelist for this way of eating. He's a great fan of a cup of coffee and a few other things too, like a splash of live cider vinegar, which has got lots of live bacteria in it. And so all the fermented foods come into play here as well. Lots of good ingredients. It might be a kimchi or a kraut with a bunch of lovely veggies that have been fermented, the veggies are still the fermentation process brings out or makes more available some of the nutrients that you might not access when you just even if you eat the vegetables raw or cooked, you then get a different balance of nutrients when you eat the same vegetables fermented. So there are lots of different ways of accessing the nutrient benefits of the plants we eat, and fermentation is a good way of releasing a lot of them.
Yeah, well, I think now that I know we can count coffee, I definitely can be a foot soldier for you, Hugh, in this 30 plants a week campaign. Because I'm
delighted to hear it, Dan.
Yeah, I'm on board. So, I mean, something that we can't help but talk about in food and indeed in living, and I know it's the same in the UK as Australia, is cost of living pressures that are really impacting people. And it is so hard for people to think carefully, or to have time to think, to have time to cook, to not just, grab the nearest cheapest thing when they're really stretched financially. I mean, how does that play into your thinking? Like, do you have, I don't know, any strategies apart from, I don't know, mine would be a universal basic income, let's say, but do you have any strategies that people can employ when things are tight?
Well, that's a really good and important question, and again, that is partly a political problem. It's partly the prevalence of cheap foods from which the nutrients have been stripped out, and they are the easy choice for a lot of people, and they don't build good health. Ways around that. It's difficult because you do need to foster a level of consciousness. If the question of the nutrient value of the food you're eating simply doesn't arrive in your life because you're too stressed, then it's going to be really hard. So we come back to a matter of education, really, and making sure that it's well, you use the word, universal in relation to income, but we do need a universal understanding of how fundamental what we eat is to our health. And that's something that's fostered at school. I mean, it's obviously fostered by good parenting, but there's no reason not to include that as a fundamental in the school curriculum. If you want to build a healthy nation, then food is where you start. And if you think that healthy food is just a kind of something for the elite, or it's a nice to have, or it's an added extra, you're never going to address the fundamental problems of your citizens' health. So that's why it is a political issue, and it is a matter for our education system. And then if you do understand that as you're young and you're growing up, and that you have some familiarity with simple whole foods, obviously, we've undergone a revolution, particularly in the last 50 years, the industrialization of agriculture, of food production, and indeed of food retail, if you like, because we're buying, as you say, we're buying ready meals and takeaways that are pre-made. So if we choose not to think at all about cooking or where our food comes from, we can be served by that market, but it won't serve our health. So as well as education about what good food is, I think we have to help people to have some fundamental cooking skills. Of course, it was seen as something of a liberation for women in particular to not have to cook every day, and we shouldn't necessarily have to cook every day. But part of that shift in culture, which is, I don't need to cook, I can just buy the food I need ready made, has a couple of decades down the line ended up not serving us well. If we do have the ability to put it together a healthy meal from inexpensive and, again, mainly plant-based ingredients, then we have a resilience so that whatever else life throws at us, if we don't get the job we want, or we don't we're struggling to find the income that would give us a more comfortable life. If we've got some basic cooking skills, there is resilience there. Now, that might sound like going back in time, but the fact is we do need to address this issue of dependency on unhealthy foods from which the nutrients have been stripped. And that is, for me, one of the key ways of doing it. Increase people's ability to feed themselves with whole foods, and that means learning to cook. There aren't that many ways around it, particularly in a marketplace where the cheap foods that are easy to access, that are ready to eat, are not good for us, and are frankly making us ill.
Yeah, we're covering some big topics, but it is really interesting and I don't know, tragic, ironic. I don't know. There's a few words you could throw at it, but just I think a lot of the healthy food that we're talking about is, you know, what you might have called peasant food from various cultures. Like it is that really, it is simple, basic, seasonal, using, you know, ferments and other ways of preserving food that you speak about. It's that it's that frugality. I think it's somehow we got away from, I don't know, like it's all got so messed up.
You're absolutely right, but let's take that. Let's take that word. You know, that frugality. It's not necessarily a pejorative word. That, and if you go back to again the peasant foods that you mentioned from cultures, well, what's at the heart of them? Often, well, often it's beans and greens and grains. But if those and beans and greens and grains are a basis for an extremely healthy meal, and if you throw in a few roots, that's got some good nutrients and indeed you know, some useful whole carbs as well. That does not have to be a depressing meal. A big soup of roots and beans and greens and grains, especially with a little pinch of spice, that's starting to be delicious. That's starting to be a really fantastic meal. If you've got a few leftover shreds of a roast chicken and you know, sprinkle them on top, that's all good too. But so the building blocks for these inexpensive healthy meals are also potentially really delicious, and you don't need a lot of skill to put them together either. And yet we very quickly lose sight of this in a sort of haze of, oh, this kind of food is just for foodies who can afford it, or and it's become sort of the fact that in some quarters you can pay a lot of money for peasant food in expensive restaurants is a little distracting from the value of the fundamentals there that are in those foods, which are really great for us and they're not expensive.
Yeah, but I think sometimes what you're paying for, it goes back to what you were saying before. It's like you're paying for the skill of somebody to cook it and make it delicious. But if we've got these skills at home, perhaps it doesn't seem, I don't know, like this inaccessible magic that only happens when it's done by chefs. We can do it in our homes as well.
We can do it in our homes, and those skills are not so far out of reach. You know, it's to me, it's a great thing that we've got past that idea where chefs were spending a lot of time not really caring that much about the quality of their ingredients, but trying to dazzle us by how they could make the food look on the plate by turning this into a puree and that into a mousse and you know, the sort of foaming some bubbles over here, etc., etc. That can be fun, and it can also be quite pleasing on the palate, but it's a distraction from what really good food is, to be honest. And now that more chefs are interested in where their food comes from, they're interested in seasonality, they're interested in the good flavors of food that hasn't been mucked about a lot on the plate. That's a positive thing. But we should all be ready to admit that that means that I mean, you know, you can still be witty and playful in the way you combine those ingredients, and that's fun for those of us who enjoy eating out. But we are not so far away from things that people can do at home, and we should acknowledge that, and we should encourage people to. And you know, I hope that's what I do with my cookbook. Say, look, I'm throwing together a really colourful bunch of different seasonal veg and plants, and maybe chucking in a tin of pulses for some extra protein and actually a lovely creaminess that you get with things like chickpeas and beans, a lovely element in many dishes. It isn't hard. We can all be doing it at home too.
I think one thing that I really appreciate with a lot of chefs and restaurants these days is that they do introduce people to new produce or to produce that they're perhaps not familiar with. And I'm thinking about, I don't know, kohlrabi that I ate in a restaurant recently. And I think a lot of people perhaps haven't done much with kohlrabi, but then they might think about it and see it at the shop and try it at home.
I wonder if what you had, Dani, did you have a carpaccio of kohlrabi, thinly sliced, arranged beautifully on the plate and trickled with some exotic oils and a pinch? I'm not knocking that but I mean, it's an interesting thing, isn't it, that kohlrabi is a swollen root of a cabbage. It's been around for a long time. You can grow it very easily at home, and it shouldn't be such an exotic ingredient. It's a great ingredient, and it can be delicious to eat it in a fancy restaurant. But also, you can chop it into chunks and throw it in a soup, and it's also really great like that.
Yeah, well, actually, this was in a Korean restaurant, and kohlrabi is not an ingredient that's found in Korea, but the chef perceived its similarity to daikon, so a radish that he had grown up with, and he cooked it in a vegetarian version of a pork dish that's normally pork cooked with daikon. He omitted the pork and just made it with kohlrabi. So there's a bit of a story to that dish, but I think what I get out of that is chefs doing interesting things with vegetables that then makes, consumers think, oh, and what's kohlrabi anyway, and what else can you do with it? And
Totally, I completely agree, and obviously it's great to show a streak of to be inspired with a streak of originality, but actually, when you do see that, often those things are it's the thinking that's original, and the actual execution is quite straightforward, and you can go home and do something very similar and enjoy yourself and feel that you've added another nice, as you say, another nice vegetable and another nice technique to your home repertoire without having to do anything super complicated or challenging.
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so maybe you go and Google kohlrabi and you realize you can put it in a slaw, and you could perhaps do a little fancy carpaccio. Why not?
Totally, totally.
Yeah. Hugh, let's like rewind all the way back. And you talked about you've had a long engagement with food and where it comes from, but where did that start for you?
Well, if you want to go way back, Dani, it started. I think one crucial moment was when my mum and dad, at the end of the '60s, moved out of London to Gloucestershire in the middle of England, which is uh, now it's Gloucestershire almost feels like in the London commuter belt because it's been gentrified to pieces. But back then it was proper farming country, and I'm talking to you from Devon, which is still proper farming country. And I did my own little getaway 20 years ago to River Cottage and to this part of the world. But it does go way back for me, and I remember my parents rented a house in a village, a little farmhouse. And when we moved in, there was already a veg garden there, and we moved in the early summer. And there were pods of peas hanging off the vine. There were baby carrots. And on that very first day, we sat outside on the lawn eating vegetables from the garden. And my dad, in that moment, he became a veg grower, having had no experience of anything like that. My mum, a year or so later, decided to become a garden designer. And our whole life changed as a result of that move. And so that really stayed with me. And at the age of 6, instead of being an urban urchin, I became a country boy, and that's informed my feelings about food ever since. And I remember that again that first year, wandering down the hedgerows of the countryside, picking blackberries and wild gooseberries and things like that. And my mother became more interested in cooking, and I would help her in the kitchen. I was pretty interested in sweet food. I've always had a sweet tooth, and I loved making cakes, and I made a lot of the desserts for her 1970s dinner parties and stuff like that, and classics like profiteroles and Black Forest Gatto, and I got into all that. But I also got into the savoury stuff and the veg that was coming in from the garden. So food for me was when the outdoor playground was maybe closed because the weather was so appalling and I was inside, then the indoor playground was the kitchen, and that for me was a great adventure from my earliest years.
It's yeah. I mean, we spoke earlier about you're not trying to make eating well seem too worthy or too much of a chore. But I can imagine, as you started to become more interested in how food impacted your personal health, that you've got this storehouse of ability and memory and wholesome a wholesome childhood to look back upon. Do you feel like people, no matter where they're starting from, they can start to build that sort of, I don't know, memory bank or experience bank that can sustain them?
This is such an interesting point because, and the answer is absolutely yes. We all have positive food memories of one kind or another, even if we might not now associate them with healthy foods that we loved or enjoyed or surprised us or delighted us when we were young. And there's a really important reason for that does connect to in a way, it connects to healthy eating and being really connected to where your food comes from. I mean, we've talked about the problems of associated with industrialized food production and nutrients being stripped out of ingredients that then go into not very healthy ready meals, takeaways, etc. That's a very recent problem. I mean, that is a problem of the last 50 years or so, and even before that, even non-industrialized agriculture has only been around for 1,000 to 2,000 years. And prior to that, every human for tens of thousands of years, every human on the planet was a hunter-gatherer. And by that doesn't make us kind of impoverished or food or desperate in our search for food. We struggled sometimes and thrived at other times, and we thrived because we had a very complex and deep understanding of the environment around us and the way it produced different foods at different times of the seasons. And wherever we were in the world, whether we're in a hot country, a cold climate, or living by the sea, or in the middle of the jungle, we knew that environment. We knew at what time of the year it produced certain foods, and when we woke up every morning, almost every day of our lives was about using that knowledge to feed, and that was pretty much the primary occupation of being a human for tens of thousands of years. Now that puts something in the whole human memory bank of what it is just to be a human being. And I think that when we take more interest in where our food comes from, if we go foraging, certainly, but even if we go to a farmer's market and talk to someone about how they grew that beautiful vegetable, or what breed of pig that is, and what they fed it, even that act is connecting with that important sort of remnant in our brains of where your food comes from really matters. And just to add one thought to that, when we were all hunter-gatherers, hunting and gathering wasn't the only thing we did. When we sat down to share the bounty of that gathering, we told each other stories. And we love a good story. And what were we going to tell stories about? How we got the food, because that's what we'd spent all day doing. So one of the fundamental human stories is how I got this food on the plate. That is basically, for tens of thousands of years, we went and got the food, and we then sat down with people who'd brought other ingredients from other parts of the forest or the estuary or whatever it was, and we told each other stories. So and so shinned up a tree to try and grab some honey, and they got stung by a bee and they fell out of the tree, but they landed on a wild pig and knocked it out. So we're all having roast pork for supper. You know, this is what it is to be human, I think, and finding ways to reconnect with that, with the deep past around food, is satisfying. It does give us. It nourishes us mentally. It nourishes our culture, and it really matters.
Yeah. Oh, look, so beautifully said. I mean, I think the reason that I love writing about food, thinking about food, talking about food is that connection. And yeah, I think a lot of our food systems explicitly and on purpose disconnect us from the origins of our food and all the impacts that it has along the supply chain. So I completely agree that the more we can take back that power and have a conversation with I had a great conversation with my fruiterer yesterday about broccoli, and he reported on his conversation with a broccoli farmer and how much the price of fuel was impacting what he was doing. And I think no matter where you are, you can probably have a conversation with someone about the food that's around us. And yeah, it's beautiful.
And that's what that's what River Cottage has been for me down the years. I mean, it started as a TV show. Now we're lucky enough to have a cookery school in Devon, and it's all about just inviting people to make connections with the food around them. We take them foraging, or we show them some new skills like making cheese or charcuterie, and all day we're talking about food, and there won't be anything that appears in front of you where we can't tell you where it comes from. And we talk about our suppliers and our friends. We're lucky to we're not the only organic farm. Two of the farms on our borders are also producing organic food and fantastic ingredients, and we love to share them. So it's engaging with these stories. And if you live in the countryside, you are, you want to be eating the landscape around you. If you live in the city, it's great to see what's coming in from around the city and to have that connection with, again, with the food that hasn't come too far. That's why farmers markets are such a great thing. And I mean, and provide us with some nice stories about the food we're taking home.
So I'm sure your timetable in Australia will be busy. The VIVA Festival's on in Melbourne and in Sydney, but will you have any downtime, and what will you be doing with it?
Okay, well, one of the things I love to do is to get into the ocean and snorkel, and I've done a little bit of that on my trips to Australia. But I am just sizing up a couple of quite exciting opportunities to go diving and to see the some of the beautiful things under the ocean around the edges of Australia. Obviously, I haven't got masses of time, and I've got to make a decision quite soon about which of those fantastic opportunities I'm going to pursue. But that's one of the things I'll be doing. And of course, everywhere I go, I'll be looking for another delicious meal and keen to find out who's cooking with the best seasonal ingredients and where I can enjoy particularly some fruit and veg that are a little bit different from what I enjoy while I'm here. And in fact, in the Viva Festival, I'm welcoming to the stage some local growers who I know will be bringing with them one or two things that they think I might not have tried before. So it's not just me on the stage babbling on as I have been to you, Dani. I'm looking forward to meeting some local growers and doing a little bit of cooking on stage with ingredients that are special to the time of year and to the place where I'm going to be. So really looking forward to coming back to Australia and really looking forward to enjoying some of your wonderful food.
Well, we look forward to welcoming you mid-March in Sydney and Melbourne for the festival. May the snorkeling waters be clear and calm, and may you see many beautiful creatures. And I wish you many delicious bites of Australian produce. Hugh, so wonderful to have a chat to you. I wouldn't call it babbling, or at least I'd say you're a dab hand at babbling, if that's what it is. But it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on Dirty Linen. Thank you.
For me too, Dani. Lovely talking to you, and hope to catch you when I'm in Melbourne.
That would be great. This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtylinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.
This